The Rebbe soll gesund sein began the Farbrengen this afternoon with a long interpretation and explanation on the specialty of this Shabbos. And that this Shabbos combines several outstanding inyanim. First of all, it is Shabbos. Secondly, it is Rosh Chodesh. And it is Rosh Chodesh of the month of Adar. And as we know, the month of Adar is a very special month. Each one of these inyanim in itself is a very outstanding inyan. Together with it, the Gemara tells us that a person is capable of picking up a certain amount of weight. However, when two people combine and try to pick up something that weighs heavy, they will not pick up double what one person could pick up, but their power becomes a much stronger one that they could pick up more than regular two people can pick up. That's the koyach of combination of two. Memela, when we are talking about a combination of these three outstanding inyanim, we must say that the accomplishments and the great achievements which one can get on such a Shabbos are much greater than by each and every inyan in itself. First of all, the inyan of Shabbos. What is Shabbos? Shabbos originated because Kivoi Shavas Vayinofash. That was the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu set aside for rest. And being that we follow whatever Hashem does, Ma hu oiseh af ata, whatever He does, the same we are instructed to do. So Shabbos for us is a day of rest as well. However, the question arises, we're talking about Shabbos as an advantage, as a day of rest. On one hand, on the other hand, we know we are told that Adam la'amal nivra. Gemara tells us based on a pasuk that the main and most important inyanim which a person has to accomplish on this world is amal, toil, tahava, to do hard work. So on one hand we say that there's a tremendous inyan in Adam la'amal nivra, and on the other hand we stress that there's a greatness in Shabbos, that Shabbos is the inyan of Vaishavas Vayinofash, the inyan of rest. So the Rebbe Zolgazunsan explains, during the week we are told Adam la'amal nivra, a person is obligated to work and to be involved, heavily involved. This is the obligation which we are told to do during the week when we are in a lower level. However, come Shabbos, we come to a higher level. So Mamela, these inyanim that have to be accomplished throughout the week and can be accomplished only through Maaseh, through the stage of Maaseh, can be accomplished on Shabbos through the stage of Machshava and Dibur. In other words, Shabbos we can accomplish much higher inyanim and much greater inyanim in an easier way as we can accomplish during the Sheish Yimei HaMaaseh. And here the Rebbe cited examples. When a Yid says Tillim on Shabbos, the Ketillim is a completely different Tillim. Or a Yid learns on Shabbos, or the being Mavasedra on Shabbos, all the inyanim which we do on Shabbos. And while being Mavasedra, naturally a person, it doesn't just say the words of being Mavasedra, he's trying to think a little bit of the Perush HaMilos, of the Mikra, of the Psukim, which he is Mavasedra, which he's going through. So Mamela, when it comes to Shabbos, and these inyanim are done on Shabbos, it is a much higher accomplishment as opposed to the inyanim to the level which we can achieve during the Sheish Yimei HaMaaseh. And therefore, Sheish Yimei HaMaaseh, we have to come on to Maaseh, to a stage of, when we're talking in terms of Machshava, Dibur, Maaseh. In the stage of Maaseh, however, Shabbos, we can achieve higher accomplishments, and through the channels of Machshava and Dibur. This is the inyan of Shabbos. Besides today being Shabbos, it is also Rosh Chodesh. Chassidus stresses and explains why is it called Rosh Chodesh and not Tchilas HaChodesh. Actually, it's the beginning of the month. So why do we refer to it as the head of the month? So Chassidus explains the reason for it is same question Chassidus asks regarding Rosh Hashanah, and the same response is given. That it is just like a head controls the entire body and contains within it to lead and guide the entire body. The same thing, Rosh Chodesh, contains within it the entire Chodesh. And when we're talking about a Chodesh like Adar, and specifically this year, it is the Rish Chodesh of Adar Rishon. In other words, this is the month that makes this year a Shana Mu'beres, that makes this year a leap year. Why is this year considered a Shana Mu'beres? Because we have an additional month of Adar, a leap year. Because we have an additional month, a month of Adar Rishon. Something which we normally only have one Adar, and this year we have two. And this is the Rish Chodesh of the Adar Rishon. Why, Bechlal, is there an union of an Iberiyah? As the Rebbe explained last week, a leap year was arranged because the Torah tells us that Pesach always has to fall out in the springtime. Shomer es Chodesh ha'aviv kivoy yatzasa mimitzrayim. In order that the two calendars, the year according to the sun, and the year according to the moon, should be straightened out, and Nisan should come out in springtime, this can only be accomplished when once in every few years we make a leap year, we have an Iberiyah. And this leap year, this year, is special than in other years. Because a leap year can be with different amount of days in the year. Could be a year with 383 days, could be a year with 384 days, could be a year with 385 days. The most number of days a year can have is 385, and this is this year. So this is a year of shleimus, of the outstanding number of days, the highest number of days possible in a year is this year. And all this comes about as a result of the Chodesh Adar, which was added on, the additional Adar, the Adar Rishon, which was added. So Mamela, it's an extremely special Rish Chodesh. When we're talking about this Rish Chodesh, it's much more than any other Rish Chodesh. Here the Rebbe explained, Benegei davening, for example. In Tefillah we find that the opening brachas and the closing brachas are always the same. Every Shemona Esrei begins with the same three brachas, and every Shemona Esrei closes with the same three brachas. However, in the middle, this is where there is a difference between one Shemona Esrei and the other. In other words, let me use it as a comparison. There are various Rish Chodesh. However, just like in Tefillas, there's a Tefillah Shachas, there's a Tefillas Musaf, there's a Tefillas Mincha, there's a Tefillah of Yom Kippur. There are various Rish Chodesh. However, each one has its specialty. And when we're talking about this special Rish Chodesh, the special Rish Chodesh today is the Rish Chodesh of Adar Rishon. Another area where we find differences, Rebbe explained. On one hand, we are told that for one that doesn't have any more time, it is sufficient for him to learn Perek Echad Shachis or Perek Echad Arvis. Every Yid is obligated to learn Torah daily. For one who's totally occupied and cannot fit into it, and there is no way that he could fit into his schedule more, it is sufficient for him to learn a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the evening. So we see how Inyanim vary. Same Torah, who stresses the greatness of learning Torah, tells us that a person who does have time, and especially when we're talking about one who Torasei Nasai, his inyan is learning Torah. In other words, his complete occupation is learning Torah. If this individual should be mevatel one rega of learning Torah, minute. We find Alter Rebbe in the first parak of Tanya tells us how the Chachamim degrade and how the Chachamim say all the terrible inyanim about a person who has an opportunity to learn 1 minute and doesn't utilize this minute. So we see that there are various levels. However, when it comes down to Maisa, when it comes down to action, the Maisa HaMitzvahs, HaMaisa Hu HaIker, which this is the main inyan in HaMaisa Hu HaIker, here is where all Yidden are alike. It comes to Kavanas, we cannot compare the Kavanas of Moshe Rabbeinu to the Kavanah of an Ish Pashut, of a simple Jew. However, if we are to look at the physical film which Moshe Rabbeinu put on, and the film which an Ish Pashut puts on, the mamish, the tefillin are identical the same. Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillin, which were two batim of the Shalyad and the Shalrosh and the Retzuas and all the details in the tefillin. Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillin were not any different than the tefillin of any Yish Pashut. So we see what boils down when it comes to Hamaisa and which are Meiser, Hu Ha'ikar. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu and the Pashat Shebib Shutim are equal as far as the Meiser of the fulfillment of the mitzvahs. Another inyan which we have this Shabbos is the Sedra which we learned today. Hagam, in the Sedra, there are many inyanim which are discussed, especially based on the teaching of the Alter Rebbe, that it is our inyan to live with the time, Daf Leben mit der Zeit, which means to take a lesson, to derive a lesson from the Pashas HaShavua. We have to find an inyan in this week's Sedra which also we can take a lesson from. And rather than looking for detailed inyanim throughout the Sedra, we can take, the Rebbe says, we can approach the name of the Sedra, which this is the beginning of the Sedra, as the Sedra is referred to, Parshas Terumah. And the lesson which we can take is a very obvious one, which is in the name of the Sedra. What is the meaning of the word Terumah? Simply, we would translate Terumah, meaning when a Yid contributes, he gives a donation, he is Teirem, he takes apart, puts aside this amount of money, puts this for tzedakah. This is the simple taich in the word Terumah. Another taich in the word Terumah is Terumah also means to elevate. An elevation, Lashon HaKodesh, Orim Nisi. Orim is also the word Teirem, it's the same word. We find in Halacha, Chita Achas Poiteres Esakri. Al Pi Halacha, when the Yidden had Yisrael gave Terumah, it would be satisfactory to take one little wheat and give this away for Terumah, and this would make the rest of the barrel permissible to be eaten. This is the halachic requirement. Naturally, the Gemara tells us that one who wanted to do it the right way gave more than that, didn't suffice himself with this limited requirement. He would give, Gemara tells us that Adam Beinani would give a 50th. Proper way, the advised way, the recommendable way is to give 1 out of 40. And the one who would be cheap would give 1 out of 60. But getting back to this expression, we find Chita Achas Poiteres Esakri. If one was to take even one little wheat and put it aside for Terumah, this would make the rest of it permissible to be eaten. Same the Rebbe says, in the spiritual sense, there's the inyan of Terumah in both ways. There's an inyan of Terumah, the separating the funds, setting aside funds for tzedakah. However, one Terumah brings to the other Terumah. Once one does the Terumah in the sense where he separates, he's Teirem, he puts aside monies to give for tzedakah, for example, this brings to the second Terumah, to the spiritual elevation to this person. And this is what this week's Sedra teaches us. The great inyan in Terumah. Same thing if a person sets aside time for learning Torah. One sets aside time for being Mekayim mitzvahs. This hafrosha, which is the first taich in Terumah, brings to the second taich in Terumah, to the elevation, to the harama. This brings to a spiritual elevation in the person, which comes as a result from him setting time aside for learning Torah, being Mekayim mitzvahs. This elevates him to a yet higher madrege. And the greatness of learning Torah, Chazal tell us, Ma'ala halon be'ema u'be'yira be'reses u'be'ziyah. Just like by Matan Torah, it was with tremendous fear that each and every Yid heard Anochi Hashem Elokecha directly from the Rabbeinu Shloim. Afkan, the same thing when a Yid learns, it is be'ema u'be'yira be'reses u'be'ziyah. The Rebbe pointed out that there are 4 expressions which express the great fear which is created within a Yid when a Yid learns Torah. And these 4 expressions correspond to the 4 letters in the Shem Havai, in Hashem's name. So the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah raises the question, how can we compare that the same fear which the Yidden had when the Yidden received the Torah from the Rabbeinu Shloim, this same fear should prevail when a Yid is learning Torah now? What is that? And the Alter Rebbe responds that the same identical attention and personal attention which each and every Yid got from the Rebishter by Matan Torah, the Onoichi Hashem Elokecha, which Chassidus stresses, which the Rebishter addressed himself to each and every Yid, which was by Matan Torah, Ma'ala Halon, Be'eme B'yira Bereses U'Beziyah, the same thing. Each time a Yid is sitting and learning Torah, the Rebishter is there. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Kaira V'Shoyne Connected. The Rebishter is learning together with him, sitting opposite him and learning. And therefore we cannot say, how can we compare this learning to the learning of which took place by Matan Torah? It is not so. Just identical. As by Matan Torah, it was tremendous fear. Why? Because the Yidden knew that the Rabbeinu Shalom is addressing each and every one of them. The same time, each and every Yid learns Torah, it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaira V'Shoyne Kenegdei. The Rebbe is sitting opposite him and learning together with him. And therefore it can bring out the same type of elevation which a Yid had by Matan Torah. The same thing that the Rabbeinu Shalom wants should be constantly whenever a Yid learns Torah. Later in the Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe learned a Rashi in this week's Sedre, and the L'Kutei Levi Yitzchak, comments on the Zohar with the comments of the Rebbe's father, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Nishmas Eden, as well as several other inyanim, which the Rebbe discussed. The Rebbe spoke again about the great importance of printing Tanyas wherever Yidden are. Any Yishuv, any Jewish community in the world, the Rebbe says, it is his suggestion, and use the Hebrew expression of a bakosha nafshis, a real sincere request, whereby the Rebbe is requesting and begging of us and asking us to see to it that wherever there is a Jewish community throughout the world, the Tanya should be printed there. And the Rebbe explained that our going out of Golus, which we are hoping for in the near future, will be similar to the going out of Golus Mitzrayim. And just like out of Golus Mitzrayim, it was all of Klal Yisrael. No one was left in Mitzrayim. However, in later exiles, in Modai, Poras, in Yovan, Bavel, Golus Bavel, it wasn't all the Yidden that went out of Golus. There was some that remained in Golus. This Geula, which is going to be through Mashiach, we hope for any minute, this is going to be a Geula similar to Gulas Mitzrayim, whereby each and every Yid is going to go out of Gulas. And therefore, we have to reach to each and every Yid to prepare him. He should be ready for Geula. We all know the famous letter from the Baal Shem Tov, where the Baal Shem Tov writes that the response of Mashiach to the question of Emasai Ka'asi Ma, when will Mashiach come? And Mashiach responded, L'kshiyafutzu ma'inasecha chutza, which means that when the wells of Chassidus, the wells of the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, will reach to chutza, will reach to the outsides. Therefore, it is our inyan now to prepare each and every chutza, even those that until now had no shaykhs to Chassidus, and we're not familiar with Teres Chassidus. It is our inyan now to reach to them and familiarize them in order that these Yidden as well should be ready for the coming of Mashiach. And by printing the Tanya in all of these different communities, the Rebbe says, it is more than that. What we're actually doing is we are taking the Mayon itself, the well, the spiritual well, and bringing it to all these chutzos. Which this is a tremendous accomplishment in preparing Yidden for Geula. Naturally, the result of printing these Tanyas is not that the Tanya should remain bound and not, chas v'shalom, to be opened and to be used. It is definitely the kavanah that in all of these places, wherever the Tanya is printed, shiurim and Tanya should be made, and Yidden shall learn Tanya and familiarize themselves with the teaching of Chassidus. And this is a tremendous step in the preparation to the coming of Mashiach, and therefore it has to be the same way to see to it, to reach out to all the Yidden, wherever there is a community, wherever there is a Yid, it is our inyan to reach out there and see to it that the Tanya reaches him, because this is a preparation for Geula. The Rebbe also mentioned, says, in the back of the Tanya, there's a listing of of each and every print of the Tanya, way back to the very first print. And the Rebbe asked, see to it that wherever Tanya is printed, the group over there who is taking care of it, the Askanim who are in charge of it, should be in touch with Kahas, which is the arm that is responsible for publishing the Sfarim of Lubavitch. And this was a Mossad which was founded by the Frierdiker Rebbe, and it is in the hands of this Mossad the authority to print the Tanya anywhere and all over. It is in the hands of this Mossad only the authority to print the Tanya, and everybody should make sure that they get a proper, in other words, a listing, a number. It should come in a sequence. In other words, let's take it for example, I think it's over 400 editions or maybe more now of the Tanya which was printed in total. To see to it that each new edition is listed properly and as it should be, the place where this Tanya was printed. Now let us go to the Rashi in this week's Sedre. In Parshas Terumah, beginning of the Sedre, Kapitel Chof Hei, Pasuk Ches. The pasuk says, "Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'soichem." The Rebbe says, the Yidden will make for me a mikdash, and I will dwell amongst them. What does Rashi comment? Va'asu li mikdash. Rashi quotes 3 words from the pasuk. Va'asu li mikdash. Rashi interprets, Va'asu, they shall make, lishmi, for my name, Beis Kedusha, a house of holiness. Actually, if we go through this pasuk, we see nothing, no question, standing or any interference, which should call for an interpretation of Rashi. It's a Galata pasuk, it's a simple pasuk. The pasuk is telling us, Va'asu li mikdash, v'shechanti b'soich. So Rashi explains, what does Rashi say? Li means lishmi, for the name of Hashem. Rashi interprets the word mikdash as a Beis Kedusha, a house of holiness. We know that everything in Rashi is extremely accurate. Rashi quotes the words Va'asu li mikdash. Actually, what Rashi is interpreting is only the words of li mikdash. That li mikdash means lishmi Beis Kedusha. Rashi is not interpreting anything on the word Va'asu. So why does Rashi quote Va'asu? Rashi should have only quoted, the quotations are also from Rashi. Rashi should have only quoted the words Li Mikdash and interpret Lishmi Beis Kedusha. The emes, the child who is learning Chumash and just reached Parshas Terumah has already came across the word Li. Torah tells us by Rivka, Kachli shtei gdoye izim. And there Rashi comments, Li meaning mine. Something which is owned by one, which one possesses, is defined as Li. Memela, if we were to learn here the pasuk, V'yikchu li truma, and Rashi would not comment anything, how would we teach the word Li? We would teach the word Li means that once a Yid makes a contribution of Truma towards the Mishkan, this belongs to the Eibishter. In other words, Li would be defined in a sense that Hashem possesses it. And anything which is owned in the Mishkan is possessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Memela, we would interpret this word Li the same way. So Rashi comes here to tell us that this is not what Li means here. Li here means that it means lishmi, l'shem Hashem. And what has to be built l'shem Hashem? Beis Kedusha, a house of holiness. Because actually there's another question which arises here. The pasuk says, "Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti." The Rebbe says he will dwell where? B'soicham, in amongst them. So there's the famous question. And in Pshut Shel Mikra, Rashi does not pay any attention to it. The pasuk should have expressed itself, Va'asili mikdash, v'shachanti b'soichai, not b'soicham. Where will HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwell? HaKadosh Baruch Hu will dwell in it, in the Mishkan. Why does the pasuk use an expression, a plural expression, v'shachanti b'soicham? And Rashi does not mention this question at all. However, when Rashi in pasuk Tes interprets pasuk Tes, let us look into pasuk Tes. For us, Ches, the pasuk says, Va'asili mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham. Then the pasuk goes on, just like I'm showing you a stavnis hamishkan, v'stavnis kol kelov, whatever I show you, v'chein tasu, that is how you shall do it. So Rashi tells us that pasuk tes comes a continuation to pasuk ches. In other words, it reads as follows: V'asuli mikdash, you shall make for me a beis hamikdash. How should it be made? Like I show you everything, Getavnis Amishkan, Vestavnis, Kol Kelov, V'chein Tasu, that's how you shall do it. And as Rashi adds on, V'chein Tasu L'Doires, this is something eternal, that all the Kalim of the Beis HaMikdash, whichever had to be made, should be made the same way. Actually, there's another question here. The child who is learning Chumash has already learned Pashas B'Shalach. And in Pashas B'Shalach, the Shira, Mikdash Adnai Koinenu Yadecha. The child remembers that Rashi interpreted what does Mikdash mean? Mikdash means the Beis HaMikdash. Here, Va'asuli Mikdash. We're not talking here about the Beis HaMikdash, we're talking about the Mishkan. The Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash were two separate inyanim. First it was that the Yidden erected the Mishkan, and later they did the Beis HaMikdash, many years later. So the pasuk begins with a Va'asuli Mikdash, V'shachanti b'soicham, and then the pasuk goes ahead. So this is what forces Rashi to say, tell us some pshat in this pasuk, because Rashi is faced with several questions. First of all, why does the pasuk here use the expression mikdash at the time the pasuk is talking about the Mishkan? Also the question, why does it say v'shachanti b'soicham? It should have said v'shachanti b'soichai. So Rashi comments as follows. Va'asuli mikdash doesn't mean the idea of a mikdash as we touched in Pashas B'Shalach when we learned mikdash adnei koinenu yadecha, that it means the Beis HaMikdash. Mikdash here means in the sense Beis Kedusha, house of holiness. A Beis Kedusha is a definition which could be used for the Mishkan as well. The Mishkan is referred to as a Beis Kedusha. We do not mean here the Beis HaMikdash. Here it is meant the Mishkan. Then the pasuk goes on, like I show you all the details, this is how you shall do it. So if we look into pasuk tes in Rashi, Rashi tells us that pasuk tes comes as a continuation to the words of Va'asuli Mikdash. That the Mikdash should be made in such a way, the words I'm quoting the words from the pasuk. The words v'shachanti b'soicham. This the Rebbe is learning is like in a parentheses. This is something which just has no direct shaykhs to this inyan here. In other words, as if we could read the pasuk va'asuli mikdash. The Rebbe says, "You shall make for me a Beis Kedusha." How shall this Beis a Mikdash here does not mean Beis HaMikdash? It means the Mishkan, which is a Beis Kedusha. How shall this Beis Kedusha be made? In other words, we could combine pasuk ches and pasuk tes and omit the words v'shachanti b'soicham. V'shachanti b'soicham is like an additional comment which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, that He will dwell amongst the Yidden. So Mamela Rashi is not getting involved to explain in detail whether the pasuk should say v'shachanti b'soicham or the pasuk should say v'shachanti b'soichai, because actually the whole v'shachanti b'soicham here is like a maimer hamuzgar. It's something which is coming, it's not negayah to the main inyan. The main inyan here is v'asuli mikdash. So therefore Rashi teaches v'asuli mikdash, you shall make me a Beis Kedusha. And how shall this Beis Kedusha be made? Now if we go back to the beginning of the Sedra, the beginning of the Sedra begins, Daber al b'nei Yisrael, v'yikhu li truma. Rebbe tells to Moshe Rabbeinu, talk to the Yidden, and they shall take a truma for me. So Rashi again teaches v'yikhu li lishmi. In other words, Rashi is following the same pattern as he's in the pasuk we learn now. So a few psukim ago, Rashi also typed li does not mean an Indian of possession here. Li here means lishmi. It should be for Shem Hashem. For God's name it should be given. Now we're going to understand why Rashi quotes the word va'asu. And Rashi also interprets the word va'asu as well. Because the pasuk here is talking about two stages. First, the pasuk tells us, the Rebbe is telling Yidden, v'yikhu li truma. You shall take the truma, put aside the truma, make the contribution. Set it aside. And Rashi comments that this kicha, this giving has to be a giving li lishmi. It has to be given l'shem Hashem. That is one stage. After the Yidden have gone through this stage, then they are going to another stage. V'asu. After the kicha, after the contribution, comes phase 2. What is phase 2? Phase 2 is the making of the things. First, the Yidden contributed that there should be all the 13 or 15 things which are needed for all the inyanim to erect the Mishkan and all the details. Now we are going a step further, and all these things have to be done. So that's why Rashi is quoting the Asuli Mikdash, the Asuli Shmi Beis Kedusha. Here we are coming to the second inyan, that the Asiya as well, the doing of all these things, also has to be done L'Shem Hashem. So that is why Rashi cannot do away with quoting the Va'asu, because the Va'asu is important. The Va'asu here is stressing. The Va'asu here stresses that there is another inyan which is done lishmi, l'shem Hashem. In other words, first there was a mitzvah of the yikhu li truma, that all the Yidden had to contribute to truma. And these contributions had to be made l'shem Hashem. Once all these contributions were made and everything, the Chachmei Leiv began constructing all these things, began erecting all these things, it also had to be done in a way of lishmi, l'shem Hashem. So that is why Rashi cannot just quote the word li mikdash, meaning lishmi beis kedusha. This is negay in the tzivui, in the commandment, how all these things have to be made. The asu, the asiya, the erection of all these things has to be done l'shem Hashem. So that is why Rashi has to quote the asu li mikdash. And Rashi comments, what does this mean? The Asu Lishmi Beis Kedusha. That the Beis Kedusha, which is the Mikdash here, not referring to the Beis HaMikdash, but referring to a house of Kedusha, a house of holiness, in this sense meaning the Mishkan. How is the Mishkan here done? The Mishkan here was done Lishmi, L'Shem Hashem. In other words, Rashi is teaching us an additional inyan, an additional requirement, which was required when all the inyanim were done. For the Mishkan, when all the erecting of all these things were done, it all had to be done l'shem Hashem. Benegay the Zohar in this week's Sedre, there's a Zohar in Parshas Terumah which tells us about Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Chiya have a Azla Ba'orcha. They were walking together. Pagabahu Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar met them. The Zohar tells us a detailed conversation which Rabbi Elazar had with them. And Rabbi Elazar praised them very much. Rabbi Elazar praised them and said, being that you are Talmidei Chachamim, you are involved in learning Torah, Atun Kadishei El Yoinen, quoting, Lav netira de lechon ki netira de Mishkana. You are being guarded much better than the Mishkan was guarded. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is guarding you. He's watching you. Who watched the Mishkan? Mishkan was watched by Yeshua. Who was Yeshua? Yeshua, Moshe's disciple. Yeshua is referred to in Chumash as a Nar. Yeshua Nar. L'yomish Mataychayim. The same thing later, the Beis HaMikdash. Who watched the Beis HaMikdash? Who was involved in the creation of the Beis HaMikdash? It was Shlomo HaMelech. There's also a pasuk where Shlomo is referred to as a Nar, as a youngster, as a lad. However, you Talmidei Chachamim are so fortunate that you are Zeicha, that who is the one that is guarding you? It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Im Hashem lo yishma'ir shav shakat shemer. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. If Hashem is not the one who is watching the city, then the guards watching really has no meaning, has no value. In other words, everything is bound to the watching of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So here we see who is the one who watches Talmidei Chachamim. Talmidei Chachamim get such type of guard, they are watched in such a way that it is in no comparison to the Beis HaMikdash or to the Mishkan. So the Rebbe tied it, was Mekasher, this inyan with the Yidden today in Russia. And who are we talking about? We're talking about individuals who are zeichet to such type, who merit such type reward. We're talking about Yidden who are today in Russia, and their fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs is with tremendous mesiras nefesh. They're bringing up children tied to Torah and mitzvahs is also bound with a tremendous mesiras nefesh. And we're talking about people that do not see any change for the tomorrow. Derech hateve, and all according to all natural setups, they do not think or believe that tomorrow or the day after there will be any change in the regime that they're living under, or any type of change that they will be allowed to leave Russia and enter Eretz Yisrael. They really do not expect this to happen. And therefore, even when they're bringing up children, it's not the pshat that they're bringing up children in the sense that if the children will go in the path of Torah mitzvahs, the child is promised that as a reward there will be a change tomorrow or there will be a change the day after tomorrow. It is not so. And actually, the question arises, ad mosai. How much longer will these Yidden be tortured to such an extent? Especially that their situation is not getting any better, but on the contrary, it's getting worse. Quotation of the words ad mosai, the Rebbe is referring to last week's Farbrengen, and explained it today again, that in the Nusach HaTfilah of Tikkun Chatzois, those people who say Tikkun Chatzois, there's an expression there, repeating itself 6 times, reiterating to the Rabbeinu Shalom, ad mosai. How much longer will this go on? And when we're talking about the Yidden today in Russia, they are not even asking any questions ad mosai. They are not even asking. And this is something which is going on not from yesterday. It's something which is going on for more than 50 years. And Al Pi Torah, a period of 49 years is already considered eternity, is considered la'olam. Especially when we're talking here about a period which is much more than 49 or 50 years, far above that. And these Yidden there are not complaining and not crying to the Rabbeinu Shalom ad mosai, and they are accepting everything. They're accepting their lot, and they are learning Torah and are being mekayim mitzvahs and raising their children in the same way at a time when all this is bound with literal mesiras nefesh. And tonight there is a Malava Malka which is raising funds to help out the activities Ezra Sachem and Shamir, which is 2 organizations which are helping out the Yidden who are still in Russia. The Rebbe says it is not to say that we are helping out by contributing for this cause. We are helping the Yidden in Russia. In the emes, it is those Yidden with their mesiras nefesh who are constantly assisting us and helping us. And it is their dedication to Torah mitzvahs and their mesiras nefesh and Torah mitzvahs which is a tremendous asset to us. And when we are helping, when we will be contributing for this cause, it is not the pshat that we are helping them. Really, in spiritual sense, they are really helping us. Here the Rebbe quoted that the Alter Rebbe writes, when he explains the pasuk V'yish Moshe onav ma'od mekol adam asher pnei adav. Torah discusses the great modesty which Moshe Rabbeinu possessed. And the Alter Rebbe explains that Moshe was so modest, such an onav, that when he realized the neshamis of Ikfis the Mashiach, he realized the neshamis that are going to live in the generation coming of Mashiach, this created within Moshe a tremendous feeling of anivus. Modesty. Because Moshe was well aware of his own capabilities. Moshe was well aware that he was the one that was chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be Mekabel Torah Sinai. He was well aware that he was chosen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take the Yidden out of Mitzrayim. He was well aware of all of his qualifications. However, when Moshe Rabbeinu realized the tremendous Mesiras Nefesh which Yidden are going through in the generation, the coming of Mashiach, in other words, referring to the Mesiras Nefesh which Yidden in Russia today are going through, and Moshe Rabbeinu realized the tremendous Mesiras Nefesh, Yidden are constantly, day after day, living under such a Mesiras Nefesh, and taking all this in consideration, they are still learning Torah and they are still Mekayim Mitzvahs. This is what created within Moshe Rabbeinu a feeling where Moshe Rabbeinu was an anav mikol adam ashal pnei adam, when Moshe Rabbeinu realized that these people are, the Rebbe expressed himself, it is not our inyan to put people into various categories and say who fits into a category of a Tanoim, Amaroim, or Moshe Rabbeinu's category and so forth. But this is what Alter Rebbe explains, that the Anivus of Moshe Rabbeinu was when he saw the Neshamis of Ikvasir Mashiach, and obviously it must mean when we're talking about these Neshamis of these Yidden today in Russia who are serving the Rebishter with such a tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. And therefore the Malav HaMalka, which will take place tonight, Malav HaMalka in itself is a very great inyan, the Rebbe spoke. Because on one hand, it is after Shabbos already. On the other hand, we refer to this meal, Malav HaMalka. We are parting with the queen. Shabbos is Malkasa, Shabbos is the queen, and at this meal, when we wash the Malav HaMalka, we are parting with the queen. So actually it means a tremendous thing. It means that during eating Malav HaMalka, the Shabbos is still present. And it is at this meal where we are parting with the Shabbos. So actually we still have the Shabbos with us at the meal of Malav HaMalka. And Malav HaMalka also has another title. It is the Sudase, the David Malka Mashiach. It is the meal which has a shaykhus to David Melech HaMashiach. And therefore it is a very appropriate time set aside for fundraising for such type of such an important inyan which helps these Yidden who are still behind the Iron Curtain and definitely have to come on to this financial assistance. And the Rebbe spoke very, very strongly in favor of participating in this Malav HaMalka and contributing for this extreme worthy cause. While talking about the Tanya again, the Rebbe also referred, as a continuation to what was discussed in last week's Farbrengen, that these weeks mark an anniversary of learning Tanya over the radio. And the Rebbe spoke last week's Farbrengen the great importance and the greatness of the inyan of utilizing everything which was created, utilizing it for Torah and for Kedusha. And the same again today, this inyan of radio, which really, why was it created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It was created taka for this reason. It should be able to utilize to bring the Dvar Hashem, to bring the words of the Rebishter, to bring Chassidus, to transmit words of Chassidus, which is spoken in one part of the world and is simultaneously carried all over the world. The Rebbe referred, there are those that criticize learning Tanya over the radio. And they claim that the whole inyan of radio is not an inyan of Kedusha. On the contrary, it's an inyan of Sitra Acha. It's something which does not have a shaykh, it's the opposite of Kedusha. Rebbe expressed himself very, very strongly. Rachmana litzlan, God forbid to say that anything in this world is created by Sitra Acha. Everything in this world is Bereishis bara Elokim. Bereishis HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything in this world. Bishvil HaTorah u Bishvil Yisrael. Everything is created only because of Yidden and because of Torah. The only thing is, the same things can be utilized in Kedusha and cannot be utilized in Kedusha. For example, we're talking, let us take a chamoyer. Chamoyer is an animal. The chamoyer was used by Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe Rabbeinu came to Mitzrayim to take the Yidden out of Golus Mitzrayim, and what was Moshe riding? Moshe was riding on a chamoyer. Later we read in the Torah that the identical inyan of a chamoyer was utilized by Bilam, who was the contrary to Moshe Rabbeinu. On the other hand, Chazal tell us that when Mashiach will come, and the time for Mashiach's coming is definitely here already. especially after all the gzeiras and shmodas, after all the tremendous trials and tribulations which we have gone through, and leisakum pa'amayim tzara should never happen again, it is definitely the time for Mashiach to come. Chazal tell us that when Mashiach will come, he will be reichev ala chamoyah. He will be riding on a chamoyah. So we see the same chamoyah can be utilized for inyanim in kedusha, and can be utilized for the contrary. I mentioned the fact that a chamoyah is a chayah that is not allowed to be eaten. This is an inyan in itself. However, we still find that it can be used for kedusha and can be used for the contrary. Furthermore, there's a chazal that tells us Lo nivra zav ela b'shvil Beis Hamikdash, that the only reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu created gold was because of the Beis Hamikdash. When was the Beis Hamikdash built? After 26 centuries, which means after the world was already in existence for thousands of years. So gold was definitely in existence before that. There's a pasuk in Bereshis. Pasuk in Bereshis tells us Uzahav ha'oretz ahi taiva, which talks about gold in the very early part of creation. Chazal tell us that Avram Avinu, when he was by his father Terach, found various getchkes, various avodah zaras that were made out of gold and that were made out of silver, and Avram went ahead and broke them. So does this in any way underestimate the fact that the greatness of gold and the whole reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created gold is only for the fact that gold should be used in the Beis Hamikdash? True, this is the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created it. However, at the same time, it was left. There's an inyan of prira, and it was used for other inyanim as well. What says there's a Mishnah? And as Chazal tell us, then Eser le Mishnah. Once a child is 10 years old, he's capable of learning Mishnah. And any child who's as of 10 years old and is capable of learning Mishnah and learns Torah with pure intentions and not with impure intentions, with intentions to take Torah and lekanter, to take the words of Torah and turn them around, chas v'shalom, or to go ahead and instigate for the contrary of Avas Yisrael. But when we're talking about a child who's learning Torah with the pure intentions as Torah should be learned, and with the pure feelings of Avas Yisrael as it should be instilled in every Jewish child, there's a Mishnah Masechta Avodah Zarah. The Mishnah Masechta Avodah Zarah tells us that a Tana was asked a question. Tana was asked, being that Shemesh and Yoreach, the sun and the moon, in those generations, were used as an inyan of Avodah Zarah, there were those that worshipped it, and this is contrary to godliness. So why doesn't Hashem Yisbarach go ahead and destroy the sun and the moon? So Mamela, there wouldn't be no room for them to make these errors and go ahead and serve Avodah Zarah. So the Tana responded, because of these shaitim, because of these fools, Ya'abed HaKadosh Baruch Hu should go ahead and destroy such important and vital things that are in existence of the world. These are a group of people who are fools, shaitim, and because of our shaitim, halalu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu definitely does not have to do it. The same the Rebbe says, there are inyanim which were created in this world, and when we're talking about radio, radio was created only because it should carry words of Torah, transmit words of Torah to Yidden in all corners of the world. However, at the same time, it is unfortunate radio is utilized for other inyanim as well. But this does not underestimate and does not take away the chshivas and the fact why radio was created. Radio was definitely created for this reason. And it took time till radio was utilized for this reason, just like it took time till gold was used for Kedusha. It took 26 generations, 26 deiros, till gold was used for Kedusha. The same thing is when we're talking B'negei radio. And Mamela, it is definitely that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this. Chazal tell us, Rabbi went ahead and said, that even a mechashef, one who's a kishef maker, a magician, and we're talking in the generations when it was very powerful. What is the whole meaning of a mechashef? Kishef stems from the word, he wants to decrease the koyach of the Rabbeinu Shloil. He wants to be machtish koyach shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So these mechashvim, Chazal tell us, who their entire goal was to decrease the power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. we're not in a position of even creating in the mullah, a small creature, to be able to create that by themselves. The mele, anything and everything which was created by the world is created by the Eibishter. Sitra acha, the opposite to Kedusha, has no power to create whatsoever. And everything which was created by the Rebbeinu Shalom. And those that criticize and claim that Sitra acha was what created it, this inyan of radio. Rebbe says we are living now in the generation of the coming of Mashiach. And one of the simonim which Chazal describe for this generation is that it will be in the times of Mashiach, Yizbaru v'yislabnu hadvarim. Everything will be purified and cleared out. And here the Rebbe referred to a taich from the Frierdiker Rebbe in the Haggadah, Chacham Mahu Oimer. Frierdiker Rebbe taiched, Chacham Mahu Oimer. In other words, what one is, this is what he expresses. And the same the Rebbe says applies to the rest of the categories as well. And when people come out with such type of statements, it is very obvious what they really are. What they really are, this is what brings about such type of statements. It is not our inyan, the Rebbe continued, to get involved in dialogues and in vikuchim with these type of people, because it is not their inyan. They are not out to change. On the contrary, by getting into conversation with them and getting into dialogues, it will only bring about, the Rebbe expressed himself, the pokar tvei, it'll just antagonize them more. Memela, it is not our inyan to get involved with them. Let it stay that way. Our inyan is to spread the teaching of Chassidus, to reach out to more Yidden, to be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs. There's a taich from the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe said, on the Mishnah, what we say in the Haggadah, Vayereyu oisonu ha-mitzrim. The Mitzrim have harmed us. Poshet the taich. The Frierdiker Rebbe asked, expression should have been, Vayereyu lonu ha-mitzrim. The Mitzrim harmed us. What is the expression oisonu? Explanation is, what the Mitzrim wanted to do, they wanted to get us to join them. Oisanu, they wanted to include us together with them. They wanted that we should get, Chas v'shalom, the same way of thinking as they have. Chas v'chalila, this is not our inyan. Our inyan is to remain loyal to what Rabbi Seinu and Nisienu have taught us, which is again that each and every inyan which was created in this world has a goal and was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and everything can and should be constantly used out of Kedusha. Here the Rebbe is talking with a lot of bitterness and a lot of aggravation. The Rebbe referred that there's a little creature, in Yiddish it's called a patofke or something like it. Yeah. Excuse me? Yeah. A piefke, right. And this little creature, thank you, and this little creature is capable of sucking blood. The Rebbe says, unfortunately, it is these people who are looking to tzap lut. But when one is hungry for blood, there are also two alternatives how it could be done. One alternative is, if he's hungry for blood, he could get involved in seeing to it that Yiddish kinder should be mauled, and bring Yiddish kinder, bring Jewish children in, bebrisa shel Avram Avinu, which is in a positive way. However, it seems like these people are not utilizing it in the positive way, they're utilizing it in the negative way, and therefore anyone they come across, every person they come across, wherever they feel they would want to, so they just go ahead and literally tap the blood, they suck the blood, and naturally not in a positive way at all, totally in the negative way. It is not that these people don't make use of television, of radio. They definitely make use of radio when it comes to advertisements, or when it comes to other things, or even things which are much worse than regular advertising, even on a standard of Hasagas Gvul, or even yet worse standards. Hasagas Gvul means when one merchant harms another by taking away customers from him. Then they definitely make use of this. The only thing when it comes to the spreading of Chassidus, this is when they begin screaming that this is something which was created by Sitra Acha. It is definitely not so. It is something which was created by the Rabbeinu Shalom to be utilized for Kedusha. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen that today by Mincha, it's a time of Mincha, towards the end of the Farbrengen, we're beginning to read the new Chazarah of Ata Tetzaves B'nai Yisrael. to command Yidden. And what does the Chazarah talk about? The Chazarah talks about the menorah. Chassidus teaches tetzaveh not only means to command, tetzaveh also stems from a deeper teich. Tetzaveh means closely associated. This is the whole meaning of mitzvah, is also the same word. That through a mitzvah, through observing mitzvahs, one becomes closely associated with the commander of the mitzvahs, with the Rabbeinu Shalom. Now we are going to read the Chazarah Va'ata Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh bringing about tzafsa v'chibah, close association with the Rabbeinu Shalom. And how is this close association accomplished? Through the menorah. What is the mitzvah of the menorah? The menorah is bringing light. That's what the whole idea of the menorah. In today's day and age, when we're talking about the menorah, it means the spiritual light, which we are fortunate of bringing to other Yidden, and particularly the light of Chassidus, spreading Chassidus to those who are as yet not familiar with it, and reach out to all Yidden with the light of Torah. Torah is compared to light, mitzvahs are compared to light, Neo mitzvah v'Torah oyer, to see to it that this should reach to all Yidden. And as we express ourselves in the tefillah of Mincha we keep, in the Shmoneh Esrei of Mincha we stress, Menucha Shleima, everything should be out of a peace, the highest level of menucha, the highest level of peace. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu should reward Yidden that they should be an Indian of their parnasa, all their needs, parnasa as well as gashmiistic parnasa, as well as ruchniistic parnasa, spiritual parnasa should all come and should all be channeled in a way of menucha, in a peaceful and easy way, and Yidden should be extremely successful. Agutavach.